Hello, my dear viewers. I'm Olga Demchuk, a researcher of the inner world of the personality. Today, I would like to talk to you about the deep-sea fish that inhabit our unconscious. Why them specifically? As I observe in my practice, people often do not realize that they have already been captured by these deep-sea fish of the unconscious. When you look at such events from the outside, it seems as if the fish has already swallowed the personality, and the personality is no longer in the world, but inside this fish. I think those of you who have been watching my YouTube channel for a long time have seen my episodes about dominance, where we talked about points of unconditional happiness and points of unconditional horror. These dominants, they are physiological, meaning that when a person experiences some intense emotions even once, they form within themselves a kind of area that starts to become activated by similar stimuli. And this activation can completely change a person's perception. Well, let's take it step by step. So, the deep-sea fish of our unconscious, which we cannot resist. When I talk to you today about these aspects of the unconscious, it's important first and foremost to acknowledge our own weakness in the face of them. We want to control everything in our psyche, to be able to undo, cure, and fix everything, and so on. But there are things we simply have to learn to live with. And when such fish rise to the surface, sometimes all we can do is wait until they sink back down again. When we find ourselves in these situations, and of course this list could be expanded, but I have selected some key moments when we should feel a sense of danger, a certain sensation. In these kinds of situations, instead of simply feeling comfortable or at ease, I should actually experience a very clear and unmistakable warning sign, almost like a big, bright, flashing red light in my mind, loudly saying, "Danger, danger, danger." These are exactly the moments when I need to remind myself to be much more alert, significantly more attentive, and far more aware of what is happening around me, paying close attention to every detail and being fully present in the moment. But instead, I fall into a kind of blissful state, and I stop noticing the danger. In other words, my instinct for self-preservation essentially shuts off. So the first dangerous fish are good people, the very same ones. I've talked about these people before, and you've probably already seen videos about infatuation and dependency. But here, these good people will play a slightly different role. Good people, we should have a sense of danger, but instead we feel comfortable. Do you remember how, as children, we imagined that some magical figure would suddenly appear and make everything better? In other words, we expect some kind of wizard, some kind of teacher, a spouse, a friend, the one. But what is it about these very people? They solve some of our problems. And in particular, they address one of the core issues of our personality, which is our sense of being bad. In other words, these are the people around whom I stop generating negativity within myself. Let's imagine there are people who don't irritate me at all. That is, they don't make me angry. They only bring me joy and do pleasant things. And very often at the beginning of a relationship, everyone tries to please each other, all parties involved. And that's why I feel good around such people. And when things feel too pleasant, too good, too comfortable, a red flag should go off, signaling that something is wrong. When a person tells something smoothly, when you communicate with them and there are no rough edges, when you don't feel any boundaries or anything holding you back while being around them. This pleasant ease is what in popular psychology is called merging. It means that this person is already included within you. You've assigned them a role as an object in your inner world, and by reflecting on yourself in this object, you feel good about yourself. There are good people with whom I don't need to be self-aware or think about what to say. I can say any nonsense and they will accept me. Some good people will never deceive me. You should trust people. I'm not saying you shouldn't trust people, but being mindful when listening to someone else helps us. Well, a person can even lie to themselves, and they might say something untrue, but be convinced that it's the truth. And we constantly want to relax and finally let go of this control. The danger of this feeling of meeting good people is that the personality thinks it has already arrived, and now it can finally let itself be a little foolish, relax, and do nothing. This person seems to be exactly what I was looking for, my state of relaxation, my experience of being carefree. The second point, which is both dangerous and pleasant, is the habit of becoming brazen. I hope you are at least taking notes on your phone, these main points, so that you can review them later, return to them, and remember what I said. Because if you just listen to the video while having tea, you won't remember anything. It will be like listening to a song without remembering the lyrics. So, the habit of becoming brazen, the sense of permissiveness. I think you've definitely noticed this in others, even if you don't want to see it in yourself. When someone starts treating you kindly, you involuntarily begin to take liberties. You start being late, you start doing your work poorly. You open a cafe, and at first you put in a lot of effort, but then when you start to see some success in the business, you feel like letting things slide and begin to act more carelessly, becoming brazen. This often happens when someone develops a close relationship with a specialist, like a doctor or their hairdresser. They start chatting, they become close, almost like family, and then it feels acceptable to be late, to you might forget that you had an appointment, or the specialists themselves may start to be less attentive and professional. Well, it's like dealing with your own people. And this tendency to become brazen is deeply rooted in our subconscious. If the expectation of good people is like a child hoping their parent will be good, these moments are there, and this fish sleeps in the subconscious, just waiting. When that good parent appears, the one who will give me this unconditional acceptance of myself and free me from the dark emotions that attack me, the habit of becoming brazen is also something deeply ingrained within us. And if we are not mindful in our relationships, this brazenness will continue to manifest. You won't really understand yourself why you suddenly feel it's okay to be late, to not fulfill your obligations, why. For example, when you first joined a group, you were attentive to others, but then you start to become overly familiar. This habit of immediately switching to informal address, of blurring boundaries, is precisely an expression of one's own sense of permissiveness. And inside, something craves this permissiveness, wants to become brazen and disregard others. So when you start to feel completely relaxed, which is pleasant for us, it's important to remember that this can be dangerous. Because, for example, in business, you begin to destroy it from within precisely through this sense of permissiveness. You start to ruin both business and personal relationships, and so on. The second and third deep-sea fish, I called it vulnerability in the mud. This is also very pleasant and also very dangerous. Vulnerability in the mud, beasts thirst for blood. For those of us who have been here for a while, remember we discussed the inner beast, how the beast survives, how it gets angry, how it feels fear, and so on. Maybe some of you remember in one of my videos I said that when a person sees someone else's vulnerability, their openness, the inner beast immediately senses wounded prey and wants to sink its teeth in. I even noticed this in the comments on my posts and videos where I share something personal. It's as if people say, something personal, wonderful. It turns out they're not so great either, not so perfect. The idea of perfection was something they invented themselves, and then they happily de-idealized it. For example, me. This vulnerability, this sense of being tainted. This beast part of us, it just doesn't let us walk past someone else's vulnerability. We want to give advice, we want to dance on the bones, we want, having found a flaw, to strike right there. It's like when someone says something and then makes a mistake somewhere along the way. And the other person at the moment of that mistake feels a sense of superiority. They feel compelled to correct, to say, this is how you should say it. This is how you should write it correctly. In other words, it's this inability to resist asserting oneself. But this should actually make us feel that we're doing something wrong, that it's dangerous to act this way. But instead we enjoy it because in that moment we feel superior. This inner beast, which asserts itself at the expense of another's vulnerability, simply cannot pass up the chance to say something. I told you it would be this way. Later, this creates an unbearable space within the person, because when someone discovers their own vulnerability, they start to sting themselves. And because of this, they can't change. They can't approach their own subtle problem areas in order to transform them. He immediately wants to sink his teeth into it. It's dangerous, but still pleasurable. Even asserting oneself at one's own expense. It's the simplest way to assert oneself against oneself. Next is the pseudo-creator. Dangerous and pleasurable as well. This is also a deep-sea creature, and it allows us to feel a godlike state. This is, for example, when I go back into the past, I begin to change the course of events in the past, as if everything could have turned out differently, as if there could have been other circumstances, and I can go in and reshape it the way I want. In the same way, I can create worlds in the future. If something isn't working out for me here, I can escape into fantasies about something and construct it just as I wish. Why does this feel good? Because I've detached from reality. It doesn't weigh me down, and I don't have to take it into account. In this world, everything is like a dollhouse where I rearrange the figures and create any combinations I desire. Why is this dangerous? Because a person who lives in fantasies, even when we recall something bad or unpleasant from our past, we tend to rearrange and reshape those memories as if we identify with a version of ourselves, a version that we are not, but would very much like to be. And this identification with a better version of ourselves leaves the home of our real self abandoned. So why should I look at myself? Why should I do anything about myself if I have the opportunity to escape into fantasy? If I have the chance not to analyze the situation, but to reshape it and make it the way I want it to be, to give this person the words I want, to have that person behave the way I wish, and that's it. I am the Holy Spirit who controls the universe. The next fish is both dangerous and pleasant, and I am not like that. Rejected, condemned. The biggest problem arises when a person comes to psychoanalysis or psychotherapy with an aggressive, hostile attitude toward their parents. Why is this a problem? Why is it dangerous to be hostile and rejecting toward your parents? Because the person denies their similarity to them. That is, whatever makes them similar to the parent will be completely forbidden to recognize. In particular, aggressiveness. For example, when a child has been subjected to physical abuse, they are forbidden to acknowledge their own anger, because then they would become like the aggressor. And people have entire lists of others whom they hate. A catalogue of enemies, which serves as the keeper of what is rejected within oneself. A person, for example, may condemn someone who completely fills the space with themselves, who talks and talks about themselves. And if someone condemns this, especially when people speak badly about others, constantly talking about them with such contempt and disgust, then that person will fail to notice when they themselves start to fill the space, when they are always talking about themselves. Here, the emotional context is important. It should be something like, look, he's always talking, making such sly, judgmental remarks about themselves, for example. I have often encountered this in practice when someone complains, my mother loved to talk a lot and I could never get a word in, says a person who has already been talking to me for 30 minutes and I can't get a word in myself. Or this person, if you don't set boundaries, will walk all over you. And so if there is condemnation, then it becomes forbidden to see this trait in oneself. What is so dangerous about this condemnation? As I read your comments, I see how you start to attack what you have labeled as bad. People even talk about themselves this way, like, oh, you really have to be such an idiot. Or people say, yes, I don't notice other people, I'm so fixated on myself. You see, in this condemnation, a person seems to dissociate from their real self, and instead of trying to understand why they act this way, they judge themselves from above. And all these condemnatory videos, when bloggers criticize narcissists, criticize abusers, they condemn gaslighters, those who gaslight. This is condemnation of some other people, of certain types. It allows you to immediately elevate yourself in your own eyes, and definitely not recognize these traits in yourself. When you start, for example, wanting to be better, this better is not like with narcissists, where you want to appear better. It's more like, I'm trying for your sake. In other words, a distortion of reality begins. The next fish is dangerous but pleasant. Flashbacks like back then. Once a person has experienced stress, whether pleasant or unpleasant, grief or joy, they become caught in those experiences. And when something appears, even remotely similar to what happened before, a person's perception of reality becomes completely distorted. They are swallowed by the fish of the unconscious, and the entire world becomes distorted. This feeling of just like it was back then can, on one hand, be a sudden and overwhelming plunge into something traumatic, but to the person it seems as if they know what will happen next. I felt so bad in that situation that my psyche imprinted it, remembered it, and now it will apply that scenario to events, even those that only remotely resemble it. And this imposition creates a sense of control and power over a situation that you actually know nothing about. In its mildest form, this happens when someone is telling you something and you interrupt them as if you already know what they're going to say next, as if you've already predicted it. And this predictability, this sense of pseudo-power, prevents you from seeing things in a new way. This is when, for example, a person reads a text but doesn't really engage with it. They say, I understand what this is about. I know what this is about. I've already pulled some kind of pattern or scenario from my unconscious, somewhere to fit this into. In other words, a person is constantly projecting this matrix from the past, and that's why they can't see things in a new way. They're always caught in the same scenario every time. The next dangerous deep water otter, that was an interesting one. Fish, dangerous and pleasant. This is toil. I think you actually know what the word means. During the harvest season, people work the fields under the sun, exhausted and soaked in sweat. And this is the kind of toil a person creates for themselves. It's the feeling that the world is attacking me. The world attacks me when it unconditionally rejects me. The world attacks me when it doesn't give, but instead I have to pay. The world attacks when I have to obey the rules and I can't impose my own rules on the world. In other words, a person is constantly in a victim state. Despite the fact that they are suffering, in this suffering they are always right and always good. In other words, a suffering person is automatically freed from their own badness. And in the victim state, many people don't recognize themselves. So when they talk about what happened, they describe it as if the world attacked them. And in this attack, I am not to blame for anything. I'm not doing anything. I don't even understand why this happened at all. It's all the fault of the bad world. So on the one hand, I suffer, I am in pain. But on the other hand, I feel absolutely innocent and good. It's a kind of exaltation. In this state, a person is dressed in white robes, worn out by the world, by poor leadership at work, by the wrong husband, by the wrong children, by the wrong world, by the wrong government. And there is this constant feeling, a desire to complain, to complain. And this urge to complain, the danger in this is that a person, even if they are good and not at fault for anything, starts to feel that there is nothing bad in me, no responsibility on my part. And by projecting all the negativity onto the outside world, a person no longer understands how to manage it, how to influence it. Next, we have our last dangerous deep-sea fish from the unconscious, a slave to the endless repetition of what once brought me either pleasure or even horror. We talked about how these dominant patterns in the psyche, if someone wants to. To learn more, there is a wonderful book by Uktomsky. You can simply Google it and read about dominant pattern. A person having experienced some kind of pleasure begins to strive, though it may seem to us from the outside, for a repetition of that pleasure, but in reality, they are seeking to relive certain emotions. Remember in the video about addictions, we already discussed why addiction arises. It is always emotional. And this I want, when it surfaces, it's like a fish that swallows a person, and then the person can no longer choose. In other words, they lose their willpower. But this drive, this longing, I think you've experienced it too, when you desperately wanted something and you, in pursuit of it, in your determination to get it, did things that you later regretted. In other words, it's a kind of being seized, captivated, a loss of free will. Why did I decide to make this video? Because even in suffering, a person can become so completely absorbed in it, so deeply and thoroughly involved, completely activated, that there is this pseudo sense of I exist. But staying stuck in this mode, and in all the ones I've mentioned, leads to an inability to choose, to a shutdown of free will. And the most dangerous thing is that when a person ends up there, they don't realize that it's already time to start getting out. It's comfortable there, even if it's self-directed aggression. It's still pleasant to feel better than the version of myself that I'm criticizing. This is the worst case scenario. And this comfort prevents us from recognizing the danger of these states. Let's go over them once again. The danger of my wants, when it feels like I would die without them. The danger of my suffering, where I see myself as pure and blameless, always making others responsible, and it feels good to see myself as wonderful. And this is dangerous, because on one hand, you feel almost saintly, truly good and virtuous, but at the same time, you do not really think about how to change the situation. You don't take responsibility for yourself. It's both pleasant and dangerous to think that I know what's happening right now. It gives a sense of supposed knowledge and predictability, and then I can't see anything new. It's both pleasant and dangerous to judge others, but this doesn't allow me to see these things in myself. If there is a habit of speaking ill about something in particular, it means that I will not recognize it in myself. We all have a little bit of everything bad in us. Some people have more of one bad ingredient, some have less. But this act of judging gives a sense of being good, while actually making a person blind. A pseudo-creator? It's pleasant but dangerous to think about how things could have been, because you can get stuck there. By constantly reshaping the past, you stop living in the present. In the same way, it's dangerous to fantasize, to live in fantasies. The real world is tough, there are difficulties, and the path is long. But in my fantasies, I achieve it instantly. And you can get stuck there and stop realizing yourself in real life. It's both pleasant and dangerous to strike at vulnerability, whether someone else's or your own. It feeds the beast that will end up destroying the very person who, not so long ago, was destroying someone else, who was just recently writing a post full of condemnation and reproach, pouring out all their dissatisfaction and indignation. But this well-fed part ends up devouring its own master. And while attacking may feel satisfying, it is dangerous for our future. It's both pleasant and dangerous to become brazen. One fish has already fallen. It's both pleasant and dangerous to become brazen. When you finally want to relax and allow yourself complete permissiveness, that's the path to indulgence. Our first deeply aquatic fish, good people, those very ones, when you want to find people with whom you won't feel your own superficiality, such fish will surface from time to time, I hope this video helps you not to treat them carelessly. And now let's end here for today. Thank you for being here and for staying present.